Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Wanted to welcome everybody to the second Jenny Roundtable. In the last one, we spoke to some amazing photographers, and now we're going to one other area of this process of photography and NFT, which are the varieties of platforms to host these NFTs. And we have three platforms here. We have Fellowship, represented by Fernando, Ashlyn from Assembly, and Marc from Art3. Welcome to all of you. And we've got some very interesting topics and some very interesting questions to discuss. But I'd like to start by asking each of you, perhaps to introduce themselves and their platforms and talk about what it is that their mission is and what makes them unique in this area of photography NFT platforms. Please, um, Fernando.
Hey everyone. I'm Fernando Gallegos. I'm one of the founders of Fellowship and creator director in Fellowship. What we do in Fellowship is, basically we are asking questions about how does the space work, how does photography work in this space, and we're turning that into actions that help bring context, historical context, and contemporary context to the NFT space. We do so by bringing different kinds of projects, by trying to think what makes sense in the NFT space and how does it make sense. That is very important also to us, the way we're going to bring those projects here and what are they trying to solve? What are they trying to solve, or what are they trying to push forward? Um, and that's basically it. We're a group of artists, curators, collectors, um, and we're trying to create a space that's healthy for photography in the NFT world.
Great. And Fernando, yourself, what is your background? How do you connect all of this?
Yeah, I've been a photo book editor for like 10 years, so mostly photo books for myself. I'm also an
Mhm.
artist, but most of my work in this area has been in the photo book section.
Mm. No, thank you. Ashlyn?
Hi, I am Ashlyn Davis Burns. I'm a founding director of Assembly. My personal background is I come from the nonprofit world, running nonprofit photo and arts organizations. I'm a curator, I'm a writer, an editor. And we founded Assembly, Shane Lavalette and I founded Assembly about a year ago to be a multifaceted virtual platform that supports photographers across many different areas of their career, really trying to answer the question, what does it mean to support the creative practice and support the creative life? So we do that through traditional gallery representation, commercial representation, and we entered the NFT space in the spring of last year with one of our artists on our roster, Alejandro Cartagena, who's part of Fellowship and Obscura. And we discovered that it was a very fruitful place for traditional fine art photographers. And like Fellowship, we're interested in supporting a healthy ecosystem in this online space for photographers mid-career to iconic artists.
Thank you. Marc?
Thank you, Ron. I'm Marc Hartog, the founder of Art3, and we are a relatively new NFT photography platform. I guess we're all relatively new, aren't we? And we've got a pretty broad mission, which is to explore photography in the metaverse. And really what that means is help photographers to understand, embrace, and participate in this sort of brave new world that we've all kind of found ourselves in. And we do that through a combination of content. We do curated NFT collections, mostly with groups of artists at the moment, and also virtual exhibitions like Edition 365, where we curated 365 artworks from photographers from all over the world and built like a really immersive virtual exhibition. That's actually where we met Jenny Dow. Jenny Dow acquired some pieces from that collection. In fact, the backdrop of this screen I just noticed is one of the pieces by Misha de Ridder, who's one of the artists included in that. And that for us was a kind of amazing opportunity to bring in over 200 artists, mostly emerging, so unknown emerging artists, sort of helping them come into the space and sort of enter it and be part of it. So that's kind of us. You know, it's all very experimental. We said it in the preamble, Ron. We're making it up as we go along. We're definitely making it up as we go along, and I think most people are at the moment. But you know, I've spent the last 12 years building photography platforms to help photographers in one way or another. And for me, this is absolutely the most exciting opportunity that's sort of entered the space for photographers, photographic artists in, you know, a generation or more. So yeah, it's cool. It's exciting to be a part of it.
That's great. Now, Fernando, I'm looking at your website, and there's different parts and things that you do. There's a permanent collection that you have of NFTs, and there's two collections that you develop. One is contemporary, and one is futures. Can you talk a little bit about these distinctions and how they kind of all fit together?
Yeah, one thing that is important to know is that the landscape of the NFT photo world is changing all the time. So we started this collection first. The permanent collection is what we call the Fellowship Trust. It's a collection that we are making by thinking what would be good, you know, to have in the NFT space to create the context that already exists outside of the NFT space, but that was lacking in the NFT world until very recently, you know, and we're doing so by helping artists onboard the NFT space, helping them in any way we can to make it easier to transition here, because for most of us that have months and sounds like a lot, yeah, but months or a year in this space, we are already accustomed to what's this space, but it can be pretty difficult for someone who has never been trying to push their work in this space. So we help them in any way we can, and with that we build a collection that will be a permanent collection made by work from contemporary artists and legacy artists. The contemporary collection is how what it as the name describes it. You know, it's work from the 60s or 50s to this era, and it's mostly photographers that are currently working or you know that are making work still. The Futures collection is a collection that we're also called native in a way, because it is work that we are looking in the NFT space that is already in the NFT space, working and exploring and making new things. And it's like the Fellowship Trust kind of pointing to something in the NFT space and saying, hey, look at that's interesting. That's interesting, and we should see it, and we should talk about it, and we should discuss about what's happening there, you know, because we think that these are artists that are pioneers in this space and are trying new stuff for photography and for the NFT space, the NFT photo space.
Well, when I think of the World Collection, I think of museums, right? An organization that has a collection would be a museum. So this is not something that you offer for sale, right? This is a collection that you accumulate.
That's right.
And then once you've accumulated that collection, certainly it supports the artists who produce the work, but you're displaying it on your website. Is that the public function of the collection?
There will be different public functions. After the collection, we have to socialize it, and that's one of the things that we are actively thinking. What are the best ways to socialize this kind of work? And this can be for groups of artists, or even for particular artists. What is the best way to socialize this particular artist's work? We also are working with well, kind of or trying to develop a division of fellowship that's called projects. That one of these projects is, for example, the Alexander archive.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's I think that's a brilliant project, and I do want to talk about that a little later. But in terms of collections, I also wanted to point out that with us is also Sleazy, who is on the curatorial board of Jenny. So one thing that he has in common with what you guys are doing is they're also creating a collection of photographs. And he's with us, and thank you for joining, Sleazy. He's also going to be part of this conversation. So in terms of the collections that you're building, is a relationship between the artists that you're collecting and the artists that you're supporting, or are these two different things with some overlap? How does that work?
There are two different things with some overlap. Most of the artists that we're supporting come to this. We are outreaching to the artists that we think could be a good fit for the NFT space, and some of these artists want to participate, and some most of them, well, are not interested right now in the NFT space. So most of the artists that we support for the trust, we contact them because we want them to be part of the collection. So most of them go to the collection almost directly. But there are some artists that maybe contact us and that are interested in making NFTs and that we think they have an interesting, good work, important work, and that we will be supporting them too. Maybe not collecting them for the trust, but making everything we can to help them onboard the NFT space in a responsible way.
Which kind of one of the things, and this I've had this sense probably with each one of your missions. If you have a collection, but on the other hand, you're promoting an artist that is not in your collection, and I'm looking at this artist, would wonder why, right? How come you're promoting this artist, but you don't collect him yourself? And on the other hand, if you're promoting the artist and you are collecting him, you're increasing the value of your own collection. So there's a bit of a problem there, right? With so many hats.
Yeah. So some things that we've been that have been pointed to us, and that we're talking and solving actively. For example, we're changing a little the way we collect the artists while we onboard them, because we were made aware that it wasn't fair to the space and to collectors, so we're changing that procedure a little. And yeah, our goal is to create a collection that can and socialize it in a way that can that can be a place for knowledge and a place for education too. So every time we make mistakes, and we will keep making mistakes. This is very.
Like we said before, Fernandez, we're making it up as we go along. So
yeah, I was just going to say exactly that, Marc. I don't consider those mistakes, right? I think that this is part of the excitement. I think that what we're forming here is a new way to operate, right? And it's kind of like you're you're building this new way to operate as you're already operating, and that's where this is coming in. And Ashlyn, I think that at Assembly, you always also have a large number of hats that you're wearing at the same time, right? You're a gallery, an agency, creative studio, all of the above and more, right? How does that all work? How does that fit together?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really, came from the space of feeling like the system was broken, from our many years of operating in that system. And, in terms of how it actually operates, I mean, in terms of our traditional artist representation, just like a brick and mortar gallery, we have a roster of artists that we represent, which means we sell their work to individuals and institutions, their physical work. We actively seek out critical writing on their work, the publication of their work. We, in terms of our commercial representation, we collaborate with brands or other entities like editorial entities like the New York Times or the New Yorker to have our artists included in their publications. And then in terms of creative studio, it's been fairly multifaceted and is beginning to the funnel is beginning to narrow and focus in on what we're doing. But we've done quite a bit of consulting with organizations and artists on their projects. And then, of course, the NFT component in some ways falls under the creative studio aspect. But in terms of the artists you're seeing here, these are the artists we represent in a traditional sense. This is our roster of artists. It's very global, it's very diverse. That's in line with our values and what both Shane and I have kind of done in our careers prior to founding Assembly. We really believe that kind of the healthy space for photography is global. It does include many perspectives. And so you see that kind of translate into the NFT side of what we're doing as well, which includes many of the artists on our roster and will include some of the artists who've not yet launched their NFTs on our roster, but it also extends beyond our roster. And, really this comes from being interested in what it means to be in this space and how an artist's work can or cannot translate to the NFT space, because just like an exhibition or a book, not every photographer's work is suitable for these specific outlets. So we're really interested in work that dialogues with the space in one way or another, whether it's created just as an NFT or whether the work kind of inherently speaks to this space through its process. And so that's what we've been focusing on for the past almost a year. And as we move forward, Assembly is actually launching our own Web3 platform, which will debut in April. And you'll see some kind of exciting new programs as part of that. So really, in our mind, they all function together to kind of, as I said at the beginning, support a sustainable artistic career. Because we know that as an artist or as a photographer, historically, we have cobbled together multiple aspects, multiple revenue streams to support the creative practice. And our goal is to make that healthy for the artists so that they can do what we value most from them, which is their creative work.
I mean, it sounds to me, and I think that this may be true to a certain extent to all three of you, you're operating in this kind of hybrid mode, very much as artists do. There are some things that you do which are commercial in nature to sustain other things that help growth, both of the artists, yourselves, public knowledge in general. And the idea is to have the right mix and the right blend. And that's where I see these aspects fit in. And Ashlyn, what would be the guidelines for the roster of artists that you particularly look for?
In terms of our roster or in terms of our
Your
operations
roster.
in the NFT? So when we assembled our roster, we really were interested in artists who are at this pivotal moment in their career. So we would call them kind of early mid-career. They're right at the point where they're getting major museum exhibitions, they're entering major collections, they're winning major awards and major grants. And we have the opportunity to position them in a broader way. A lot of the artists on our roster are well known in other areas of the world. We're based in the US, so a lot of them have strong footing in Europe or in Latin America, but are less grounded in the narrative of kind of the American institution. And so for us, it's a really exciting opportunity to introduce their work to the institutions and collectors that we have relationships with from our former roles. So, they're all at this really interesting point in their career. All of them are working in really interdisciplinary ways. Right. And some of them actually would not identify strictly as photographers. They would identify as lens-based artists. And I think this is a really interesting thing to talk about in terms of the NFT space, because we've all seen it kind of grow and evolve so rapidly in a way that very much mirrors the history of photography. And I think in the next year or two, we will see that kind of interdisciplinary nature more embraced. Right now, we're maybe in a slightly more traditional space. Sure. But for Shane and I, we are deeply rooted in photography and in the history of photography. And for us, it is by its very nature a technological medium, a multifaceted medium, and it is by its very nature constantly evolving. So to kind of limit it to just one mode is to deny the very core of what photography is. So we're really excited in artists that push the boundary and dialogue with the history through that boundary pushing that kind of is conceptually and formally reinforced in their work. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're interested in global perspectives. We live in a global world, and I think we all can probably recognize that, especially with the history of photography and the contemporary state and the NFT space. I mean, I'm the only woman on this panel, for instance. There is a dire need for diversity, and that is it's always been kind of at the core of what we're doing, and we're committed to that moving forward.
That's great. Marc, you come from a very long tradition of publishing, the organization from which this stemmed, that started as can we call it analog publishing? Yeah, probably.
Yes, back in 1854. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's before that's before there was analog publishing, because that's the only publishing there was. And how does that flow from an 1854 magazine to NFTs? What's kind of the connecting theme in that?
Well, so that my background is actually finance. I'm an accountant, believe it or not, from a very long time ago. But thankfully,
some of my best friends are accountants.
But and I'm sure they're very nice people.
Absolutely.
As are mine. But
right.
So no, I mean, I moved into the publishing world quite a long time ago, and about 10 years ago, we acquired the British Journal of Photography, which was a lovely magazine with a rich heritage, and really what we tried to do since then was sort of build different platforms and awards and commissions and work with brands, not dissimilar to some of the ways that Ashlyn works, but the kind of unique part of that business was discovering very early stage photographers. So kind of tomorrow's talent today is before they get to that point where they're winning awards. We were finding them, championing them, and sort of helping them launch their careers and really becoming those sort of mid to later stage photographers. And I got very interested in NFTs. Crikey, it wasn't that long ago. It was less than a year ago, probably around about March, April, about the same time people sold for all that money and everybody started looking at this space. But what I was excited about, while there's obviously an element of bubble going on and an opportunity to help photographers take advantage of that, it was really more about the utility. I thought the technology was very exciting. The the sort of complete transparency from a collector's point of view, from scarcity and provenance, but also from an artist's point of view. The most exciting thing for me was that artists would, for the first time, be able to connect very directly with collectors, but also participate in the future upside of their work. So that for me was absolutely game changing, and that was the real catalyst for getting involved. So I started looking at it from an 1854 perspective. We launched Art3 under the 1854 umbrella, and I think quite naively thought at the time that we had this huge audience of photographers and collectors within there, and we thought, well, we'll go to them and we'll educate them, and we'll sort of bring it all together. And couldn't have been more wrong, frankly. I mean, if you had a Venn diagram of the traditional art market and the NFT sort of collector community, I'm not even sure they'd properly meet in the middle. If they did, it'd be a tiny handful of people. I remember, Ashlyn, when we first met, you told me this, and I was like, well, that can't quite be true, but absolutely, you're completely on the money. It is. So, and that sort of follows through. It's really divisive technology, and the whole thing. There's a lot of misinformation. There are some facts, which have been skewed or misunderstood. I think there's a little bit of kind of fear of the unknown, and there's a real split between people who get excited about this technology and the opportunities, and people who think it's a massive Ponzi scheme and terrible for the environment and so on and so forth. And and there's elements of truth in all of that. There's kind of nuances in the middle, I guess. But really, that was the catalyst for splitting. So it was so different, and that division came from not just our audience, but also the team and shareholders and everybody. It's just even remember a board meeting just trying to explain what an NFT was to the board of 1854, and it's difficult and people are very skeptical. So really that was the catalyst for splitting. So this is my focus now. I'm really excited about the technology, but the focus will still be on emerging talent. So we won't have a roster as Ashlyn does, for example, of here are the photographers who we represent. It's more about curating, finding open calls, still working with 1854 on some of their awards and things like that, and really representing photographers. So the ones you're looking at now, that's Ones to Watch. So that's like an annual call where the great and the good from around the world, festival directors, curators, picture editors, put forward their nominations to the British Journal of Photography editorial team of the next talents, and we then curated a collection, and for the first time here we basically represented them as an NFT. So it was 5 pieces from 16 artists, and most of them, well, in fact all of them were new to the NFT space. So and it was experimental, but it did pretty well. Most of the artists sold something, a number of them sold out, and we're now going to be working with some of those artists, for example, on solo artist drops for their next projects and that kind of thing.
But one of the things that I'm curious about is this idea that from 1854 to 2022 and beyond, you're still publishing, right? In 1854, you were publishing on halftone that leaves black smudges on your fingertips after you finish reading the Journal of Photography. And now you're publishing in the Metaverse. You're presenting your photographs in the Metaverse, in simulated 3D spaces, with the photographs simulatingly hanging on simulated walls. That's quite a trajectory. That's quite a transition. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of a mode of publishing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've always, for the last 10 years or so, we've been sort of platform agnostic, I guess. It's like, we're presenting work in a variety of different ways. I mean, just to be clear, the Art3 is now a completely separate entity from 1854. But you're looking at edition 365 here. I mean, it's publishing its content just in a different way. We work with New Art City, who built the platform to create really immersive virtual exhibitions. And for us, there was nothing really new in that. It was just a different way to present that work. So we've had physical exhibitions, in various institutions and places around the world. But we also had a portrait of Britain, for example, which was presented on digital advertising screens around the countryside. So millions of people were able to see that exhibition. The gallery, if you like, became bus stops and roadsides, and train stations. So this is just another way, again, of experimenting, getting that work out there. Fernando said before, socializing. So just finding different ways to present this work to a wider audience, give photographers other platforms, but in this case, allow them to monetize that work in a way that perhaps what we were doing before was less easy to do.
Fernando, would you consider something like that as a way of displaying your permanent collection?
Well, it's one of the possible ways of displaying a collection. You know, this is a blank page. We can do whatever we want in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's scary as well as exciting.
Yeah, you remove the physical boundaries of space, and suddenly your imagination. It's very easy to let your imagination go wild.
Yeah.
So curating this actually
the time barriers too. It's really amazing.
Well, but on the other hand, in these last couple of years of COVID, art fairs are now virtual as well, right? Art Basel now has virtual rooms to display things in. So things are catching up, and I think that the distinctions are blurring a little bit. So we're going to have to work harder if we want to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think it's still really early on as well. I mean, you know, during COVID, we looked a lot for clever ways that people were presenting work in the digital space, because nobody could go and visit a physical gallery, and most of it was really lackluster. And the New Art City, the guys that we did that with, was the platform that we thought, right, yeah, these guys have got something going. But it's still early. You know, there's no, you know, yeah, you can chat with an avatar, but it's not the same. I think there's lots of platforms, there's lots of money being spent on creating really interesting ways to view work and, you know, interact with people and artists and work in the metaverse. But it's still really early, and it's still not a substitute right now for in real life. But it does mean that everybody from anywhere around the world at any point in time can be together looking at a piece of work, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. Sure.
Sleazy, you're a curator, right? And you're managing a growing collection, and that's actually this collection that brought us all together. Have you guys given thought to how you display your collection? Is it something that you display to the other collectors on behalf of whom you're purchasing, or are you thinking of displaying this to the public?
That's been an ongoing conversation internally for us, as I'm sure it is for everyone present here. But one of the things that I want to pull out from the discussion so far, and I think is applicable here, is this artist forward narrative that is that underpins the paradigm shift that the NFT technology has brought forward. And I think because of that, we can now reform our imaginations about how images and photography should be put on display. And one of the core pillars of our investment thesis or strategy is the artist narrative and artist relationship bit, which I personally have personal and professional interest in. And that to me is a real opportunity for us to think about how do we tell stories and build these ongoing relationships in a way that makes the artist feel that their work is displayed with integrity and trueness.
But how does the idea of collecting NFTs, and Fernando, part of what you're doing is creating a collection. You know, people who collect physical photographs, right, have them in a drawer or have them in a tax-free port in the Netherlands, or, you know, many other places, but not really in places where they're on public view. And this is an open question to all of you. Is part of the idea of collecting NFTs rather than physical objects, having the ability to display them to the public? Because they don't take up a lot of room, but they're also much handier to display, being digital objects, right?
There's a thing with photography that I think it's at the root of what we are all doing here, and photography wants to maybe sounds weird, but photography wants to be seen and wants to be reproduced. It's in its physicality, and its photography wants to be reproduced. So whatever we do, the photograph will go out there and socialize by itself. I think there's a distinction that is important to think about here. The distinction between displaying and socializing, because the idea of photography or of displaying a collection, one could go to the fact that maybe you don't need them to be NFTs just to display them. But if they are NFTs, what can you do with them? So we're not thinking about exhibitions in the traditional way here. We're thinking of how can this technology help photography do what it does best, and that is reproduce itself and go find new eyes to create new stories. I think the world is socializing more than displaying. And what does socializing mean, and how, which forms can it take? I think it's the more important question.
Yeah, I think for the first time, right, the collector has the ability to tell their story through their collection to a massive audience. And I think that's really exciting, because if you are a collector, you identify with these works so closely. They become part of your personal narrative. And I think beyond that kind of personal expression of the collector, there's also a real untapped opportunity to support the artist in that context, to contextualize them within different movements, that might, like I was reading Architectural Digest the other day, and Alicia Keys has an incredible collection of contemporary Black artists. And it was, of course, photographs of her home and this artwork in her house. And the thought occurred to me that the only people who can really experience this kind of profound collection that in many ways is activist in its own origins is to enter her home. But what if all of these were NFTs and she could share these stories with the world? I think that's the powerful opportunity that we're given here, whether it's through the collection displayed through your wallet, or if you're doing really radical installation-based collections in the metaverse through all of these many different platforms that are arising. To me, that's the exciting part for both the collector and the artist. And then that relationship between collector and artist it becomes much more transparently powerful, the ability to tell their stories together.
But I think that maybe this different kind of collectible requires a different kind of collector, right? Because if I'm the Korean heir to the family fortune, and I'm the winning bidder on a long lost Picasso at Christie's, I'm going to bid on it anonymously. And once I get it, I'm going to keep it in my house, and nobody else is ever going to see it except maybe my children when they get divorced, and it's part of the divorce settlement in court, right? So the kind of collection of high-powered collection that we've seen in the past, in many ways, has to do with the fact that I bought it and I can look at it and you can't, because I'm richer and I have it in my home and I'm the winning bidder. Right, so that there is that kind of collector.
It's the Venn diagram.
Fortunately,
is that Venn diagram?
Fortunately, not all of them. Right, I think of wonderful museums that that collectors have created for the public to see their collections. Right, so I don't mean to. Not all rich people are bad, just some of them. Right.
But Ron, I think increasingly we are living our lives online. And I think we're all here because we believe that will continue, and it will become, much even more present than it is right now. And so I think the ability to have that part of your identity and passion displayed in this space will translate even to the people who want to remain anonymous. I mean, there's so many collectors that I'm sure we all know of, that there's a big question mark of who they really are in their real world, or occasionally celebrities will pop into your Discord and everyone gets really excited that Elijah Wood is there, or that maybe Snoop Dogg is there, or maybe the heir to the Medici fortune is there. So I think that anonymity can play out in this space and in other interesting ways. I hear you, but I guess I kind of disagree that that the private nature will keep those individuals from this space. I think it's becoming part of our world, and there's a massive wealth transfer happening from boomers to millennials, and millennials grew up in this really interesting moment. I'm a millennial, where we both experienced the world before and after the internet. And then we have the next generation. And, I think that this is here to stay, and it will forever change the art market. It's just a matter of the art market kind of catching up and figuring out truly its place. And I love, Sleazy, like what you were saying, the idea of the shifting paradigm. That's what we're doing here. And that's what's so exciting, is like the radical nature of being able to rewrite that right now. Like, we are all a part of that history and can kind of shape what we think should have been there all along.
Yeah. And of course, the nature of this world is that one can display whatever it is that they're collecting and still remain anonymous, right? So I can have my collection and nobody knows who I am. And it could still be public and could still be displayed and could still be mine, my property, and I own it. And nobody can take it away from me, but everybody can see it.
Yeah. There's one other thing. Sorry, we're talking about it as if it can only be digital or physical, and actually that's not necessarily true. So we've been experimenting, for example, with unlockable content within the NFT, which includes a physical print. So, a beautiful archive quality physical print, which gets sent to the first person who buys that NFT. And we did it initially because we thought this will help onboard the traditional collectors in what was 1854's community. But actually, it's been really surprising that a lot of these anonymous or pseudo-anonymous sort of digital native collectors have claimed that print, which obviously helps build that relationship as well. But and it's a better way to buy too, because they can see, they know there's only going to be one of those. I've got the provenance. I can see that edition, is one of one. It's come with my certificate, and it creates other interesting things. So I know Sleazy, Jenny Dow have been the pieces that you bought from Edition 365. You're giving, there's a raffle to give the physical print out to somebody within the community, kind of thing. So there's ways of kind of bringing the digital and physical together, and I think in the fullness of time, NFTs, smart contracts, are going to be the way that most things are bought and sold, including art. Whether or not even if there's never a digital variant of that art, it's just a sculpture or a painting or something, I can just see it, in a while, not yet, but I can see it in the fullness of time that these smart contracts being the way that things are transacted.
Yeah, there's also the thing that I think it's very interesting to think for me that in many ways we are a generation of really confused people. We are here in the NFT world, all very confused, but willing to try things. And I think one thing that we're trying here is we are seeing digital assets and we are saying, hey, why shouldn't this be valuable? And with photography, I think it fits perfectly, because if I'm seeing a photograph in the screen, if I'm feeling what I have to feel through the photograph, if I'm transporting to a possible reality beyond the photograph, why wouldn't it be valuable? And the knowledge of that is, we've been seeing a lot of onboarding of photographs that were made to be physical. But as it has been pointed out in this roundtable, this will change very soon. We'll start working for the medium with the knowledge that it will be digital and it will travel digitally through the space to many people. So the first thing is to figure out this thing that has us confused right now. That is it valuable? And I think we're starting to realize that digital assets can be valuable and don't have to be just a copy of something that exists out there.
And I think that a very good example of that is August Sander and the work that you're doing with him, because there's very few other photographers that I can think of that are so rooted and so well associated in the realm of the history of analog photography, right, as August Sander. But perhaps you can speak a little bit about this project that you're doing as an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's well, the August Sander 10K project is a project of 10,400 contact photographs from the August Sander estate project that we work with Julian Sander to find, in a way, a new way or a new home for the archive to live and to be seen and to be studied and to socialize it. We market it as a 10K photography project, because there's this tradition of 10K projects in this space, but in reality, what it is an experiment on how to bring historical archives into the NFT space, how to give them a second or third life or another life, how to make it available for people to see them, to study. And there's all sort of questions around it. And I think all of those questions are valid and are part of us trying to understand what is it that this space is useful for. And yeah, one of those questions is what do I get when I get this NFT, from the August Sander archive? And it's the easiest question for that is what you're getting is an NFT made by the August Sander estate that refers to a photograph that made August Sander, and that is a vessel of knowledge and a possibility to keep building on that knowledge. Because one of the things that we're doing with this work is that, as it says, the metadata will be dynamic. So there will be forms for people to submit new information for the photographs they have or they've seen, and that information can be added after review to each of the images. So it's a way of keeping a current and an archive and to socialize it in a way that we think can be effective if people are it's spreading, through everyone who collects them and who shares them, and yeah, all of it points to the same archive. So we think that's very interesting.
And the occasion in which you launched this is the anniversary of the death of the grandson of August Sander, right? Because this photography is very much a tradition in the family. In the male heirs of the family for 4 generations.
Yeah, this the information that have these prints and the fact that they exist is an effort of the family through generations. So yeah, this is just another part of that long line of efforts made to preserve the knowledge around the images and the images themselves.
And I was reading some of the things that Julian, who is the great grandson, and talks about the fact that he's the first generation in this lineage that has not gotten to meet August Sander himself, who was the grandfather of his own father. And he talks about the importance of the craft of printing, and how starting with his great-grandfather, all of them from father to son have learned the tradition of very fine black and white printing, which is obvious in those prints, right? I've looked at these pictures of August Sander himself developing printing his photographs with, there's one picture with this cabinet full of many jars of different recipes of different developers, different things that to use to make very precise, very on point prints. And I think of Ansel Adams, another icon, maybe the next one to be launched on something like this. And something that I just learned recently is Ansel Adams was trained as a classical pianist. And he always spoke of the taking of the photograph is like writing the score, and the making of the print is like playing the music. And this is why I can imagine that each generation of this family of printers of August Sander created their own version of what they thought would be the perfect print of these iconic images. And that's why I think that a very important element of what you're adding to the NFT is exactly that metadata that talks about the generations and what happened to that image through the years. And for me, that's a very exciting part of that.
Yeah, even if actual prints exist of each of them and where they are. So in a way, this work also activates the physical work that exists out there,
Right.
still from August Sander.
Yes. And Ashlyn, exactly in this area of the relationship between an NFT and physical work, I was looking at David Ekahogi, who is one of the artists that you represent. I think his images are really amazing, but he is a lens-based artist. And if I compare him to August Sander, who made a photograph, made an image, a lot of his work, as originally displayed and as originally conceived, is very sculptural, right? It's the lens-based artifact is part of a construction that he makes that exists and has a presence. Dare we say an aura in the space, and that's part of the way in which a beholder appreciates it, right? If we look at this example here of the photograph hanging from the wall, there's a lot of intentionality, there's a lot of agency in the way that this was presented. How do you go from something so physical to something so digital?
Yeah, I mean, David Alakogi's practice is extremely interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and many of his works do become quite sculptural, whether it's coming out from the wall as you see perpendicular to it, or printing on flags, or even using the material of shoe boxes to create the work that is in some ways inherently photographic, but it's not what we immediately think of as a photograph. And for us, these are really exciting physical objects. And I think, I have kind of theories on how this space might evolve to be able to embrace this kind of work. But when we think about display, indeed, some of it doesn't truly translate. And I think that's okay. Not everything needs right now to be an NFT, but I think it also opens the possibility for the artist to reimagine what their work might be like in this space. Perhaps instead of being sculptural, it's moving. It implies the physical body moving around the piece in a way that one would experience sculpture. Perhaps there is music associated with it. I mean, I think there's numerous possibilities here, but it does take a retranslation of the work, or simply making new work that has that inherent dialogue with the space. So, I mean, kind of as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think everything easily translates to being an NFT, and I think that's okay. I think just like with any medium or extension of a medium, we need to think carefully about that. because not everything needs to be this. But I think a lot of his works really do dialogue with the space really well, particularly the pull-ups, which are kind of a typology that become almost like Rothko-esque paintings.
That was exactly the association I had. And also these amber colors that he uses also remind me of Rothko.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. I don't see any questions that we have from our viewing audience. And this would be the time, because it's getting to be that time where we're looking to wrap things up, unfortunately. Because I feel that there's so many interesting topics that we've just begun to touch upon. Fodder for a couple more roundtables, perhaps. My question for all of you is future-facing. We've seen and we've heard about the things that you're doing now, and some hints about the things that you're doing in the future. Is there anything that you want to highlight in terms of the approaches and the direction that you're planning to take in pandemic year 3? Marc, you're muted.
You think in pandemic year 3 we would have stopped doing that, wouldn't you?
I hope not. I really hope this does
Can you hear
not
me? I can
come
hear
as
you.
second.
I can see you.
Exactly. I really hope this does not become second nature. I really, really do. I can't wait to get out of this.
I know. Well, we're nearly there.
Present
Thursday.
company excluded.
Thursday in this country, at least, we're apparently COVID's finished. Yeah, we're about to embark on our next experiment, which is our first solo artist drop. And that's with an amazing photographer, actually a very well-known photographer called James Mollison, with a project called James and Other Apes. It's a project that's well known. It's been exhibited all over the world. It's been collected all over the world. There's been a book, and he basically traveled around the world taking sort of passport aesthetic style photographs, portraits, large format portraits of apes from 4 different great ape families. We're going to be presenting those with him in a small curated collection of 50 editions of one. And I'm excited about it because, aside from the fact that it's incredible art, it's really amazing work, and the sort of humanity you can see in these apes is astounding. But it taps into that zeitgeist. This is where it's experimental, of kind of apes in the NFT space, but in a way that's real art. With each of these guys has a name and a story and physical and sort of aesthetical traits, which we know the NFT community like. So yeah, I think it could be an interesting one. Jenny Dow are going to sort of be part of that exercise with us. So yeah, that'll launch in the next couple of weeks.
That sounds great. Ashlyn?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, our Web3 platform launches in April with a really exciting project that is made just for the NFT space and kind of answers some of these questions about how does sculptural work translate. There are a lot of interesting programs that I can't say too much about yet, but that involve some really interesting partnerships and community activations. And really, one of the things about our marketplace that we're most proud of is it really prioritizes the collector experience and the interaction on the screen with the work. We're aiming to have a really beautiful marketplace in which the work does take priority. I wish I could say a little bit more, but there's some really exciting things, so you'll have to stay tuned.
We're looking forward to that.
One thing I do want to just highlight is, and I talk about this on almost any opportunity I get, but there's a lot of conversation about the lack of women in this space. And one of the things that we are committed to in the year of our platform launch and moving forward is that every other drop will be by a female or non-binary artist. And so
Excellent.
I'm very excited to bring more of their voice into the space.
Sure.
Because I think it's very needed and the work is really exciting.
Excellent. Fernando.
Kind of the same as Ashlyn. There's a couple of projects there, but it's not. We can't disclose it yet. But what we are working actively is just trying to push things in this space, trying to figure out what we're doing, and trying to find new ways and better ways to socialize work that we think deserves to be seen. So there'll be a lot of experimentation. We have one project that is one of our first projects, kind of narrative way of presenting a work in a space by Gregory Halpern. It's called C6 Dreams. It's a work that will be made from some photographs that weren't used in the book by Gregory Halpern and some texts. So we're building something that will be an experiment on new ways of creating narratives in the NFT space. So that should be.
That sounds great. Yeah. Sleazy, what's next for Jenny?
Well, I'll comment on a couple of things actually, but one of them is the ongoing relationships that we've been able to establish with artist groups and collectives as present here has been a really interesting and beneficial focus for us. And we're looking to solidify those relationships in more concrete and material ways as we go on throughout the year. But I want to highlight a point that we covered earlier that Ashlyn so eloquently reiterated and Marc and Fernando contributed to, which is although the space is exciting and novel and brings about all the joy of the energy around it, I think it's incumbent on us as new entrants to be as thoughtful and considerate and purposeful with how we go about amassing collections, socializing the work, and showing the artists and the artists' forward thinking that sits underneath it. And I think even in the allusions to more inclusive and thoughtful dialogue around this is where I'd like us to focus beyond just collecting the pieces.
Absolutely. I think that Ashlyn, you touched on that from the very beginning, that we're all coming here very cognizant of mistakes that were made before us, and we're very adamant about not making them. And I think that this is a very important characteristic of what we're all doing here.
Yes, we have the opportunity to write the history that we want.
Absolutely.
Inherit. And I think that is such a thrilling opportunity that we all have.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a great note to end. And I want to thank all of you for the generosity of your time and what we've been discussing here. I feel that there's some topics that we just started to touch upon. So I think that would behoove a repeat engagement, perhaps later in this year, where you can all talk about these exciting projects that are emerging, and we can all meet again and discuss those as well. Thank you all very, very much for your time. Until we meet again, have a wonderful evening, day, night from wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Take care.